All right, I am back once again, and in front of me I have a selection of 3 lenses, and these are all 3 35mm lenses, all of them of course in the Nikon S mount, and I chose these 3. If you're familiar with my channel, you probably know I have 3 that are specifically Nikon and then a couple of third-party ones, and I chose these 3 because they all have an aperture of about 2.5 or 2.8, so I think it's a pretty good comparison. And those lenses being the Kamura 35 f2.8 made by Senyo Kyoki, if I'm saying that right. The Voigtlander 35mm f2.5 made by Cosina. And then the more standard Nikon 35mm f2.5, which of course is made by Nikon. And this is technically a W series lens, but this is probably the most common 35mm lens, or very closely tied with the 35 f3.5 version in this same barrel. I also have the later Nikon 35 f1.8 that came with the 2005 SP, and then I have the earlier 35 f3.5 that's made in occupied Japan version. That's a very early one. I think I'll do a comparison at some point where I compare all 3 of those to each other, and maybe all of them together, sort of cross the entire board at some point. But right now I'm just going to kind of go over and do a very, very, very basic, very unscientific comparison where I basically just show 3 of my favorite photos I've taken with these lenses, which would be 1 from each individual lens. So first of all is the Kamura. This is one of the images I really like from it. It's a little hard to pick one. I really like this lens. It's probably my favorite of the overall lot, and probably one of my favorite 35s of all time. I've shot some color on it, and I think the color is pretty good, but I really love its depth of field. It doesn't show a whole lot in this image, but it has a really nice depth of field rendering. I think its color rendering is pretty good as well. I haven't shot a whole lot of color film on it, but I do like it. I find its black and white renderings are really nice. They have a really nice high contrast type of look, and there's just something about it I really enjoy. It's hard to quite put your finger on it, but it just seems like it has a great combination of a good contrast, and then just a nice sharpness, and then a really good dramatic depth of field when you need it. Next up is the Voigtlander 35 f2.5. So technically it's a little bit faster. I looked around, and I don't love the color renderings of this one. I mostly shoot black and white, but I think its black and white renderings are pretty good. I didn't have a huge number of them. I found that its wide open renderings are not particularly great. But if you close it down a lot, which is what you see here with this image, it has a really nice look where you have like everything is in focus essentially. It's almost like using a larger format camera or a larger format camera lens combo. And I don't always love that, but sometimes, you know, there are times you need that or you want that. And I find that this lens really kind of shines there when it's closed down a whole lot and everything's in focus. I'm not a huge fan of the wide open rendering, like I said, and I haven't even shot with it wide open a whole lot. I will say that this one does have a very nice, this sort of like widened ring that gives it a really nice feel on the camera. It's very easy to kind of turn it, and you definitely know you're focusing and you're not messing with the aperture, and the focus is going whichever direction you want. That's something you don't quite get with the other lenses. The Kamura is not bad, but it is a little bit stiffer, which can be good or bad. And the aperture ring kind of turns the wrong way compared to all the rest, but I don't really find that to be a problem most of the times. I will admit, this lens probably has the best ergonomics overall. Even though it's probably my least favorite of these 3, the ergonomics are great. It came with this little tiny lens hood that kind of fits onto the front. I can't get it off now, but it will come off. I like that. It's nice to have a lens hood, but it's especially nice to have a very low profile one like that. I don't know how much good it does, but it is nice to have one that can just sit on there and not really get in the way, and you don't really have to worry about it getting knocked off or anything. So lastly, we come to the Nikon, the 35 f2.5. So same speed as the scope R here. I like this lens a lot. One thing I don't like is the aperture is kind of inset in the strange rim ring, and you kind of have to look at the front to figure out what your aperture setting is. It's not the end of the world, but it is kind of awkward. It's something you see on some older cameras, but you don't really see it on more modern cameras and lenses. I do like the look of the lens. It looks really nice wide open. It looks really nice closed down. It has a pretty nice contrast. I like the color rendering of it too. I would say out of all the lenses, it might arguably have the best color rendering. I know most people would point that, the Scope R probably should have the best color rendering, but from what I've seen, I think its colors are usually just a little bit overly exaggerated. I'm sure there's certain films like Portrait or something where the Scope R is probably the one to go with, but the stuff I've shot, some Fuji Superbia and a lot of Kodak Gold, I kind of prefer the color renderings of the Nikon. Black and white is very nice too. I mostly shoot black and white, and I think all these are good black and white shooters with a nice contrast and just a nice look in black and white. It's hard to explain, but some lenses just work really well. They lend themselves to black and white film, and I would say that the Nikon and the Kamura do a very good job of that. The Scope R, not quite as much, but again, I don't think its color renderings are particularly great. But yeah, that's basically it. I would say I find all three of these lenses pretty tolerable. I would say the Kamura is probably my favorite. The Nikon is a pretty close second, and I would say the Scope R is kind of I'm not necessarily a huge fan of it. Price-wise, I think the Nikon is usually the cheapest and the most common. The Scope Rs are fairly common. A good thing with them is you can get them in screw mount and you can get them in M mount as well. So they're very versatile lenses. So this is probably the one you're most likely to encounter. But I'm just not a huge fan of it. I know a lot of people like this lens, but to me it just doesn't quite do it. I don't know how else to put it. The Kamura is probably my favorite in all honesty, but it is pretty rare. There are screw mount versions you can get, but from what I've seen, it seems like almost all of them are an earlier 35 f3.5 version. But I do like this one, and I would probably say this is my favorite out of the lot. The Nikon is a pretty close second, but even then there are different Nikons, so there's probably other Nikons I would choose over this one. But all in all, there's a little sample of 3 different lenses that you could potentially put on a Nikon rangefinder, and a couple of my favorite photos with them. I know I'm only showing one photo of each one, and somebody's going to complain, but I have done in-depth reviews on all 3 of these lenses, and each one of them has several photos, so just look on the rest of the channel if you want more photos. You can look on the Discord too, there's more photos there, so I don't want to hear anybody complaining about there not being enough photos. But that's basically my 2 cents on a small selection of 35 millimeters for the Nikon rangefinder system, and I think next time I'll come back and go all Nikon and show you the other Nikon lenses and some of my favorite images with them and some of the comparative differences between them. So stay tuned for that.